in the spirit of Homer, Euripides, and Dostoevsky, the principal chronicler of the fundamental issues of our age, Oliver Stone.
What can you say after that? Thank you, Dennis. That is very, very, very kind of you to greet me like that. Who wrote it? Did you write it?
Yeah, I wrote it.
Did you write it?
I wrote it this afternoon. On this piece of scratch paper.
Well, I didn't have any idea what I was in for. And, it's quite a store. I hope when you put my book up on the rack that you can find it again. I can tell you just a brief background of how this came to be, because it's an interesting and oddball history, and I guess many of us have similar. We wrote when we were younger. I wrote this in a moment of great change in my life when I was 19 and 20 in 1966 and 67. I had just come back from Asia the first time. I'd been a teacher out there. And I'd also served in the Merchant Marine as a wiper, which is like the janitor on the ship. It's you get the worst kind of all the low ball jobs that you do, all the engine room work, and it was very exciting because the ship broke down in the ocean, and we had a couple of near drownings, and the engine broke down in the middle of the Pacific in the middle of January. So it was quite something, and I'd seen a lot about the early Vietnam period of 65, 66 of the soldiers going out, and I heard stories about it. More importantly, emotionally, I was in a place where my parents had fallen out with each other. They'd divorced, and there ceased to be a semblance of a home. So I was very much sort of on my own, and I didn't have a place to go back to school. I didn't feel comfortable in school. Didn't have a family in the sense of a brother or a sister. It was through writing, essentially, that I was able to stay focused and to stay real with myself. It was the only way. I didn't have, as a 19-year-old, I didn't have any identity outside of that, except as a student, which we all are to some degree. I was thinking morbid thoughts in those days, very dark thoughts, and I think that if you'll see that, the book is constructed and framed as a suicide note. And it all comes down to a hotel room, a cheap hotel room in Mexico, where the protagonist is struggling to stay, through writing, to stay alive. And I would say, to cop a phrase of Shakespeare's, very much the theme of this book is, it turns out to be or not to be. And that is the question. Oddly enough, it took me some 30 years to realize that was the theme of the book, because when I finished writing it in 1967, it was a mass of 1,400 some pages, sprawls of emotions, and it was never brought together into a beginning, middle, or an end satisfactorily. And I gave up. I burned out on the book. I stopped. It became like a Nabokov book where you confuse yourself with the protagonist and confuses himself with the author, and the identity is lost forever in the shifting labyrinth of consciousness. I was burned out, and I was confused, and it was in that state of mind that I dropped out of college again, a second time, and a final time. My father said it was over. I would never. He was pissed off about the tuition money that he lost, but more importantly, he said that I would probably be a bum, and you know, writing would be the death of me, and I would. And he himself had been a very good writer, so these were hard words for me to take, and I felt, as many of you who write do, that I had been involved with myself too much. And after a year of self-involvement, I felt burned out on this being, and I wanted to disappear. And seeking anonymity, I really went back to Vietnam as a soldier in the infantry. I enlisted, and I volunteered for the draft, and I insisted on going back into the infantry, not so much because I was a gung-ho person politically, but more about dealing with my destiny, getting to the bottom of myself, and as I said in Platoon, getting to the bottom of the barrel and seeing what that was like, seeing what reality was like at its worst. And in a sense, in a larger sense, because I was a coward, too cowardly as Hamlet was to pull the trigger on myself to commit the act of suicide. In a sense, it was like turning my fate over, my destiny over to the gods of war and saying, have me if you will, this is it. I'll throw the dice in Vietnam, and if it's intended that I should not survive, it will happen that way. Otherwise, we'll see what happens. And that's what happened. I got very lucky. I survived the war, and I went there during the worst period. And I was wounded twice and made it to 68. And when I came back to America, it was really as another person that had grown from the larvae out of that war. I came back another type of individual. And I never looked back in the sense of wanting to commit an act of confessional literature ever again. And I went on into screenwriting and movie making. But you're haunted by the ghosts of the past, as we all know. And all through these years, I never forgot this book, the words in it, and the price that I had paid psychically to write it. So it was very fortuitous in my life that I happened to mention it a couple of times on interviews. And out of the blue, an editor from St. Martin's Press named Robert Weil, who Dennis knows very well, and his mom is here today. She lives in San Diego. And it was Robert Weil, who had a very good reputation as an editor with people like Henry Roth and Heinrich Ball. And he came to me, wrote me a wonderful, charming letter, and asked to read the book. I didn't give it to him immediately. It took about a year. He wrote me a couple of times. We talked, and eventually I trusted him. Gave him the material from a shoebox, where it was all yellowed and out of order and everything. And Bob read it in detail and made copious notes on the margins of the book. And most importantly, emotionally encouraged me. Was the first person in the world to ever tell me that it was worth doing, and that it was, in fact, I had to do it. It was not like something I could walk away from. And within a year or a year and a half, I sat down, and after Nixon was released, actually, last year, and for 6 months, and I can't think of another more joyous 6 months in recent memory than having been alone in a room and being able to have the luxury to write and rediscover the mind of a 19-year-old boy. I hope if you have a chance to read the book, you'll see that and remember your own life when you were 19, or a boy or a girl, and remember what it was like to be in that position of vulnerability, looking for the light to a candle in the darkness. Thank you.